Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. So it is December 11th and we're really flying through this month, I think. So today we're going to be working on some quilt wall art. So just stay with me on this one because if you have some favorite blocks, this is a really fun way to make it into art without actually having to quilt anything. So we're basically going to be making a block and then attaching it onto some canvas. And I really love how it turns out this way. Having the coating on it makes it really easy to clean, and it looks really, really nice. And I think you guys will have fun with it. It's gonna be a fun way to try out something new, I think. So what you'll need for this project is a canvas. This is a 12-inch by 12-inch square. If you're wanting to do it with one of your favorite blocks, then just try to get a canvas that is really close in size to the block size that you're making. You'll need some Mod Podge. I like the satin, but if you prefer the gloss or any of the other ones, you can use that. And if you want to make this snowflake block that I designed, then you'll need to go to my blog. It's in the description of this video, and there'll be a free printout for you. So it'll look just like this. It'll print out 4 pages with 2 segments on each one. So this block is foundation paper pieced. So it comes together really easy. It is a lot of fun to make, and the template will be available for you. Just a note, when I go through demoing how to make one segment of this snowflake block, you'll see that the printout that I use doesn't have the letters and numbers on them. I just thought having it already labeled for you would make it a lot easier for you, so I went back and went ahead and filled all that in. So now all you'll have to do is choose your colors of fabric. You won't have to number them. All right, so let's just jump right into the tutorial. Okay, so here are the foundation papers that we're going to use to paper piece this snowflake. And it does look kind of daunting, I will admit, but you're gonna wanna cut it out. You don't have to cut perfectly because you're gonna do that later. In fact, it probably is best if you don't cut right on the dotted line here. So I'm just gonna cut this out. Super easy. And just leave it at that. Okay, there was something a little bit satisfying about just cutting haphazardly with the rotary cutter. Okay, so the way this is laid out at this point doesn't really matter because the colors should kind of help you work through where you want everything to go. One thing you could also do is just color everything. That would, help you as well. But if you do really want to lay it out, one of the things you can look at to help you figure out the way this all comes together is by following along with the white and light blue blocks. They alternate back and forth, so that helps you with the layout, figure out where they all go. Okay, so what I would suggest doing at this point is either grabbing some colored pencils or something like that. If you have a very specific idea for how you want everything to lay out, then you could say like, oh, I have this dark blue fabric, I want it here and here, and I want it all to connect around and all of that. then you could take a dark blue colored pencil and kind of color it in to help you know that that's where you want it to go. So I'm gonna mark where I want my colors to go on here. I don't want to color everything right now, so I'm probably just gonna write it in. You could do that as well. It just depends on what will really stand out to you so that you get your fabric laid out the way you want it to. Now, I know for sure I want this snowflake print that's on top. I want it in the center that kind of looks like a star. So I'll write that in there. And then I'm also going to want that where the white is on this outside. So that's going to be the snowflake. And then this lighter blue is going to be my dark blue. So I would just go through and mark that because I have a light blue, I have a white, I have a gray here. And so I'll just figure out where I want all that. I think I'm gonna have my dark blue here as well so that the snowflake really pops. And then I'll probably go from gray to light blue to white and have that the same going around in this, what is it, a hexagon? 1, 2, 3, 4. I think, yeah, hexagon shape. So I'm gonna go through and just write in where I want all my colors to go. Okay, so I have everything marked on my papers and I'm gonna gather them together and just leave one to work on at a time. So another thing that you may want to mark on it, and it's totally up to you, is the order that you're going to sew them. We're going to start with the point that's going to be in the middle of the block and then work out. Okay, so now I know what fabrics I want to use, and I have pretty much everything all together. So now it's just getting my fabrics ready. Now, what you really want is, well, one thing you're gonna realize is that you're probably gonna use a little bit of extra fabric on this. Now you could measure your block and add, a 1/2 inch of what you're gonna need there, but I'm probably just going to cut off some fabric here and as long as it covers the areas that I'm going to need it in, it'll work perfectly. So I'm going to cut this one a little bit wider. Make sure I don't have that fabric into there. Okay. And let me grab some dark blue to work with. I have some scraps of that. And the white that were already cut because this was all for another quilt. So that should cover that area perfect. So to do our first stitch, let me cut off the selvage over here. We're going to be keeping these lines up on our block because we're going to be looking at them while we sew. And we're going to put, so I'm just going to kind of put this here, kind of see where I have it on the block. Another thing you want to do is lower your stitch length on your sewing machine. I'm going to put mine down to 1.5 because when we sew across here, it'll perforate our line a lot, so it'll be a lot easier to pull this paper off when we're done. Okay, so I have my snowflake fabric ready to go behind the snowflake here. So we're going to leave that with our wrong sides together. Then we're going to get our dark blue behind there, and it would be right sides together. If we were using a printed fabric or a side that has the right or wrong side, we'd put our right side there. And then you'll want to make sure that your fabric that's going to be on the snowflake is completely covering that area. And you're also going to want to make sure that when we fold over this blue fabric after we sew it on, that it's going to have enough here to fold down and cover up the entire dark blue area that we're working in. So I get that on here. And one thing people do like here is having a light table to see if everything's lining up and everything like that. So you can kind of hold it up and see if you have a good light source nearby to make sure you have everything covered and how you need it. But I think we're good. So what I'm gonna do is go over to the sewing machine and sew across this line between 1 and 2. Okay, so we stitched across the line between 1 and 2. And if you notice, I also back stitched at the beginning and the end just to make sure to secure all those stitches. So now what we're going to do is fold up our foundation template, and we can trim off 1/4 of an inch so that we don't have all that bulk back there. Okay, so now you can see that we have our snowflake and our blue attached. So now we can look and see the next one that we'll have is our white. So I'll place my white back here, and it's going to be going where we'll be sewing along the line that's between 2 and 3. So if this was a pattern piece, we'd have right sides together back here. Okay. And then, you know, we know that this fabric has gone over, so we could just trim that off if we wanted to for now, so we don't have a whole bunch piling up there. And then I'll take this to the sewing machine and sew between 2 and 3. Okay, and you can kind of make sure that you have at least a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, so I sewed across that line that separates block 2 and 3, and so now I can fold the paper back across that line I just sewed, and then I can trim it down to 1/4 of an inch. So fold that down, press that out. And if you wanted to really make sure these seams were good and flat, you could take it and press it real quick. So now our next color is going to be our light blue. And for this one, I'm going to kind of measure. So I'll probably, just to be safe, go to 2 inches, and I'm going to cut off two inches from here. Okay, and then we'll have the same thing happen. We'll want to put these right sides together if you're using any patterned fabric or anything like that. Okay, and we're going to be sewing across between 3 and 4. So I'm going to take that over to the sewing machine. Okay, so I have that line sewn. So I'm going to fold back right along that line. And I'm going to trim down the excess. And press that out. So I'm going to go ahead and some iron chain. I did starch these, but they're really not wanting to press really flat. Okay, so now I just have the gray and the rest of the snowflake for this block. So the gray I know is the same, about the same width as that blue. So I'm gonna trim off 2 inches of this just so I can kind of not keep wasting as much fabric. I'll still have some waste, but since this is a nice almost rectangle shape, I think it'll save me some fabric by doing that. I think that's one of the biggest things that keeps me away from doing a lot of paper piecing is how much fabric you use. You do get such beautiful blocks, but I feel like the fabric waste is definitely a little bit more here. So again, if this was a patterned piece, we would be putting right sides together back here. So I'm gonna place this back here, make sure that I'm covering everything, and then I'm gonna sew between 4 and 5. And you really only need about 1/4 of an inch over hang past this line for our seam allowance from the gray. So if you're really wanting to save a lot of fabric, just keep that in mind. But I'm gonna go sew between 4 and 5. Okay, so I sewed across here, and you guessed it, we're gonna fold back along that line and trim down to 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, and fold this fabric down, and I'm gonna press it really quick. Okay, and it covers the gray square perfectly. So now we just have the last snowflake piece to sew on, well, for this block. Okay, so I'm gonna just kind of trim off some of the extra here. And okay, so we're gonna put right sides together back here. And what we'll do is sew right across there. And I've been back stitching where I start and stop. Okay, so I sewed between 5 and 6 for the final segment on this block. We're gonna fold this back and trim just to make sure we don't have a lot of extra seam here. Okay, and now here I think is the fun part. So we're gonna fold this last part down and press it. And then right now it all kind of looks kind of funky, right? To be honest, it kind of looks like a little bit of a mess. But this is where you really get to see how this little block looks. So you see there is a solid line and then a dotted line. We are going to want to trim along the dotted line because this inner area here between the solid and the dotted is our seam allowance for when we sew this all together. So I got really close here on not making it. Oh my goodness, I should have watched that a little bit better. I think I'm good up there. Whew, I think when I walked over, I shifted that a little bit. Yikes. Okay, so I'm gonna trim along here. And I'm gonna save this because it'll totally work on one of my smaller snowflake areas. So keep trimming along that dotted line. Okay, so now let's see how our little segment of this snowflake block looks. Much better, much cleaner. So now all we have to do is make a ton more to finish our little block. So we have all of these, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 more to go. So next I'm gonna do one that starts with a snowflake and ends with a dark blue, just to kind of see how the pattern looks coming together, doing one that's right next to it. So I'm gonna work through this one. Okay, so now all of these segments are sewn together and we're going to sew them into pairs that will create 4 squares. So what I'm going to do is fold these together and I'll be sewing along this diagonal seam here with a 1/4 inch seam. Because I'm leaving the paper on, I'm going to use these wonder clips to hold everything together as I sew, because putting needles in here will be a little bit hard with all the fabric and then the paper as well. So I'm going to do that with each of these and bring them over and sew them all along that diagonal seam. Okay, so our segments are all sewn and they'll be turned into squares. So what I'm going to do at this point is bend the seam allowance paper here so I can remove it. And it should come off fairly easily. I'm going to do this in the seam of all these so that I can press that seam open because there's a lot of fabric that's coming there to meet. So I really want to press that open so it lays nice and flat. Okay, so now I can take this to my ironing board and press this open. If you want to go ahead and take off all the paper, you can. I'm going to keep it on so I can use it as a guide to make sure I'm sewing a nice 1/4 inch seam since I already have it on there. But let me press these open and remove the paper on all of these. All right, so all these are sewn and pressed. So now I just need to bring together the top row and the bottom row. So again, I'm just going to fold them together, add some wonder clips, and sew a 1/4 inch seam across here. Okay, and then after I sew that 1/4 inch seam, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to remove the paper along the seam on both sides and press it open. Okay, so we have these sewn together and pressed open. So to finish this block, all we need to do is sew these two sides together. So after I sew these two sides together, a 1/4 inch seam across here, I am going to remove the paper in the seam allowance, press it open, and then I'll be removing all of the paper from the back. If you're going to make this into a larger quilt instead of just one block, you could leave the paper until you have all your blocks pieced together if you would like. All right, so my block is finished and I'm gonna get it ready to attach to my square of canvas. Now, since the canvas is about the same size as the block, I'm going to put a border around it so that I can wrap it around the sides of the canvas and make it look nice and clean. All right, so I have the border sewn on, so now I'm gonna start attaching the fabric to the canvas. Now, you want to make sure to get all of the lint in threads off the front of your block or it'll never come off again after we seal this. So what I'm going to do is apply a generous amount of Mod Podge onto the canvas, and I mean generous. So I'm using a satin finish. You could use a gloss if you want yours to be shiny, whatever you want. I like the way the satin looks. I don't want mine really glossy. Now, you could just, you know, staple the fabric on to the canvas, you know, wrap it and staple it onto the back. I like applying it this way because if you put a nice coat of the Mod Podge onto the front of the fabric once you're finished, it is much easier to clean your design, like clean off dust. You can just wipe it off much easier. It doesn't get into all the grains of the fabric. So I like this method. Okay, I have a nice coating on, so I am going to Gently put my fabric back on top. I like to line up the seam because I know this fits on here perfectly up at the top, and just lay it down. You'll really want to work to press this out nice and flat, because if there's any ripples, they are going to stay forever. Now you see that some of the glue is coming through. That is fine, because this will dry clear. All right, so I'm going to flip it over to the back so that I can fold this over and onto the back. Like I was saying, if you didn't want to use the Mod Podge, you could, if you wanted to, just fold this over and staple it onto the back like you see they've done with the canvas. Whew. And you can see I put some freezer paper down to protect my cutting mat. You'll want to have something down because this gets really messy. Okay, I'm going to keep working through on attaching this. Okay, so I have it nice and coated, so I'm going to set it somewhere safe and let it dry overnight, and then we will take a look at it. I know you might be a little worried, but just trust me, it will dry clear. It'll be nicely coated so that you can easily wipe it off and clean it, store it, do whatever you need. So let's see how it looks tomorrow. All right, so our snowflake is all finished. What do you think? I love how it turns out this way, and I hope you had fun making it. Let me know in the comments what you thought, and also this block would be really fun to make into a quilt as well. The block finishes at about 12 inches by 12 inches, so if you wanted to make a quilt, just add as many blocks on widthwise and lengthwise, and you'll have a beautiful quilt as well. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow for our next project.